I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over. And I have to tell you, I've been reading Arundhati Roy since 1997, when The God of Small Things was first released in paperback. It was a huge hit. It won the Booker. All of us everywhere were reading it, and it is now sold over 6 million copies worldwide. And actually, I went back to reread it this weekend and couldn't find my copy because I'm sure I gave it to someone saying, "You must read this. It will change your life." And the copy I have is in its 34th printing. And that's no small thing. Now, there was another novel in 2017 called The Ministry of Utmost Happiness. There is collected essays, My Seditious Heart, that comes in between. So if you thought for some reason Arundhati had stopped writing, no, that's not correct. More importantly, there's a new memoir, Mother Mary Comes to Me. And well, let's just say I may have fallen in love with Arundhati's gangster mama. I think we have to talk about your mama as a gangster, Arundhati. I think that's the only place to start. Thank you so much for joining us on
You're
Port Over.
so welcome. My pleasure.
So seriously, you open this book by calling your mother a gangster. Let's
Yes,
start there.
she was a gangster. And like all gangsters, she had darkness and light and
Hmm.
everything in between, many, many facets. And to me, I just, believed that she belonged in the pages of literature and history.
Yeah.
And it was a challenge to me as a writer if I could put out the gangsterdom
Hmm.
without judgment, all of it.
I will say the Mrs. Roy, as you call your brother and you both call your mother Mrs. Roy. Um, the Mrs. Roy that I met in the pages, she's an outsized personality. She is the founder of a school, a coeducational school, no less, in a moment where such things were not really happening in India. She changed the face of inheritance and law. She was the plaintiff in a noted case. I mean, your mother was really outsized. She was a big personality and didn't always sound like she had time for you and your brother, but yet it's pretty clear that you guys were very loved.
She was, I mean, she did this, she did the school in a very conservative small town. It's not that
Mhm.
there weren't co-ed schools in other places, there were, but not in little towns like ours.
Mhm.
And she changed the Travancore Christian Succession Act, which gave basically, I mean, not to get into the legalese, but
Right.
basically gave women no inheritance. And she challenged it, and it was changed with retrospective effect, and women were given equal rights, which made her a huge figure among obviously certain circles
Mhm.
in India. Like as I say in the memoir, I sort of recognized that I had not one but two siblings, that there were three of us, my brother, me, and then this brick and mortar school that she started. Early on, there were seven students, two of them were my brother and I.
Mhm.
But later and now, it continues to be a very successful and beautiful school. And we had to call her Mrs. Roy because she didn't want the other children to feel that, we had some special place. And about being loved, well, it was a very thorny, spiky sort of love, and
Mhm.
maybe harder in many ways for my brother
Yeah.
because somehow she held him responsible for the sins of all men, her
Right.
husband, her brother, her very cruel father. She was hard on me too, but her public battles for women somehow included me, but
Right.
they didn't include him. So, you know, as I say in the book, there was a I mean, he and I are very close, and it was hard for me to write about the fact that I didn't have the same
Right.
feelings toward her that he does, and
Mhm.
I understand why he feels the way he feels,
Mhm.
and mine is more ambiguous for a whole lot of reasons. There's a
Right.
lot of love, and I was devastated when she died, but I ran away from home when I was,
Right.
18 because I couldn't take it. But like I say in the book, not because I didn't love her, but in order to be able to continue to love her, I did have to make that distance.
But your brother, and when I say I fell in love with your mother, I fell in love with the version I met in the book. Obviously, I have never met your mother in real life. But your brother's response, you handed in the manuscript, and he actually laughed until he cried or he cried until he laughed. I'm not sure which came first. I mean, he said you had gotten the truth of the thing. And I mean, that to me sort of sums up everything I've read by you. And I have read a lot of things by you, my friend.
Yeah,
Um,
he said I laughed and cried and I
mhm,
couldn't breathe and I think I might die. And it's not, I think there's no truth, but I think what it is that there is space for in the book as well as in our lives
mhm,
for both of us to have different feelings about
right,
things, and that's as it should be. Everyone
mhm,
doesn't have to come to the same conclusion or have the same emotions,
right,
but we must make space for each other, including make space for the things she did, to
right.
him, to me, whatever, while being this most amazing woman.
Doesn't I mean, I have a younger brother too, and it's like sometimes our memories don't line up. Like we were clearly raised by the same people in the same place. And sometimes our memories just don't align. I mean, I think your situation with your brother and your mom is a little more complicated than that, certainly, but at the
I
same
think
time,
it's not that our memories actually do align. It's just
okay.
that our reaction to things were
Ah,
different.
okay. You left at 18 to go to school and studied architecture. And then that sort of also brings you to film. And I'm looking at the through line of you as a creative person. Start architecture, I get. Film, I get. Like it all sort of is a very clean through line to me in terms of the creative process. And I'm hoping we can spend some time on that evolution of how each piece got you to the next stage of your creative life that and ultimately get us to the God of Small Things.
Well, the book talks a lot. I mean, after my early childhood, and
Hmm.
while I'm in my last year in high school, which was a different school because my
Yeah.
mother's school was not right up to high school then, and her school, which was just started in the rented halls of the Rotary Club of Kotte, where we used to go
Hmm.
every morning and sweep up the cigarette butts and set out the furniture, and that was the school. But as it became successful, she raised a little money to buy a piece of land and then
Right.
met this remarkable architect called
Yeah.
Laurie Baker. And that's where my mind sort of hooked onto the idea of how exciting design was. But as
Hmm.
I say in the book, it was not just a lofty ambition
Hmm.
because there were a whole lot of other things involved, including finding out that if you join the School of Architecture, even when which was at the age of 16 then, which even once you join, even after first year, you can start working. Somehow you can start earning something. And I knew I had to leave home. I knew I had to find a way of surviving.
Hmm.
Otherwise, I would have been destroyed, by
Right.
this force that my mother was. So that's why I joined. And then it became something that fascinated me. But by the time I was in the fifth year, I was more interested in urban planning, in the politics of cities and how they
Hmm.
came to be, what they are. And then I by then had become a person who wasn't going to build houses for rich people and so on. And I went off to Goa with my partner, and we were just totally broke, and we used to sell cake on the beach and so on to survive. And then I left. I couldn't stand that tourist paradise type of
Hmm.
stuff, and came back to Delhi, started working in an urban design office, and
Hmm.
then met somebody who asked me to act in a movie. And I was just like, okay. And I learned film scripting, eventually became a production designer because I was an architect and the
Right.
whole design thing kicked in. And I worked in cinema. I acted in that film, and then I wrote two screenplays. And then I felt like I had earned a little bit of money and a little bit of time to sit down. I
Hmm.
had been on the run, on the run, on the run, on the run. Sit down and ask myself, if I had to write something that I really wanted to write, what would that something
Hmm.
be? And that turned out to be The God of
Right.
Small Things. Yeah.
Your parents' marriage was considered mixed. They had different backgrounds. They divorced when you were small, if I have the timeline
Three,
correct.
before I was three, yeah.
Okay, so
Mm.
when you and your brother were small, they divorced. Your parents, your dad, you have a line in the book where you say, "My dad was a photograph," because you didn't really reconnect with him until you were in your 20s after this period of separation with your mother. And he's kind of a character. He's not exactly necessarily maybe who I would have thought we would have met.
Well, he was an absence in my life, in my
Right.
entire life. All we had was this photograph and some very scanty commentary from my mother,
Hmm.
most of which, I mean, because he was addicted to alcohol,
Right.
and he was right up in the northeast of India in Assam. So it was just some theoretical thing for us, not for my brother so much, but for me.
Hmm.
And I had no idea who this person was other than this photograph. And then she would say things to us like, oh, he was just a nothing man. And
Right.
then anything bad about us, she'd say, oh, you got that from your father, as if, one half of us was a litter bin in which you could throw any kind of
Yeah.
rubbish. And then I left home, of course, initially to join the School of Architecture at 16, but then I just stopped going home by the time I was 18.
Hmm.
So basically, the year that my mother and I re-met after many, many years of
Hmm.
my estrangement, that and my brother and I hadn't spoken to each other for about 7 years, and he
Right.
saw a photograph of me in a magazine about this movie I'd acted in. And
Yeah.
he got in touch with the producer who put him in touch with the director. Then he called the director and who later became my husband, but and
Hmm.
said, "Do you know Arundhati? And she's my sister." And he said, well, she doesn't have a phone, so he left a number for me to call. And I went to a, sweet shop in Delhi and I called this number, and it turned out to be some horrible little hotel near the railway station. And my brother came on the phone and he said, guess who's with me? I haven't spoken to him for 7 years, and just from his voice, I said, Baba. And
Right.
I knew that he had gone and found our father.
Hmm.
And then there's a whole account in the book
Hmm.
of this meeting in this filthy
It's
little
wild. It is just
hotel.
wild.
Yeah. And I mean, it was wild because I first saw him and he was this destroyed
Right.
human being. His ear was bitten off and his one eye was, green with cataract and peeing in his clothes. But he was very cheerful and very happy and very
Right.
funny. And I guess I didn't have, initially I thought, oh my God, I can't, this can't be my father. And
Right.
then
Right.
the second thought was, but imagine how much worse you'd have felt if he's some smarmy, cigar smoking CEO. This is
Right. Hmm.
okay.
Right.
And then, of course, it was just this crazy encounter, absolutely crazy
Right.
encounter. And so the person who was an absence in my life is obviously a presence in the
Yeah.
book. And maybe because I didn't have to grow up with someone who's an
Right.
addict or whatever, I didn't have any expectations. So I just realized within a few months that you can't even leave your bag and go to the loo because the money will be gone. All the priority was how to get hold of alcohol. But somehow I I just found him so charming and um, crazy, and even all his little blackmailing tactics. After the God of Small Things came out, he would call me and say, Arundhati, the New York Times wants an interview with me. And I'm like, are you trying to blackmail me? Please give them an interview. I'm not ashamed of you at all. You know. Hmm.
He was also your mother's escape, though. I mean, she was kind of clear that she married him. She married the first man who came along because she needed to get out of the situation she was in
Exactly.
as
She had
well.
a she had a very, very cruel father. So that's the thing about, the way she was with us, which was
Hmm.
which was, I suppose, for many people unforgivable. But for
Right.
me, even from the time I was small, I could see the whole thing like a chemical experiment,
Right.
like what was being done to her and how that anger was building, and
Hmm.
then how she downloaded it onto us in some ways.
It's your response to her, though. I mean, the idea that Mrs. Roy is so much a part of not just your experience on the planet as a human being, but also the work that you do, the writing that you do. I mean, certainly she sort of set you on the path, but also set an example for you. I mean, to be certainly a single mother in India at that time where you were was scandalous. It was shocking. It was unacceptable to so many people. And in fact, you sort of end up living in her father's home again, or the summer house, I should say. And there's a whole family situation because they're like, you're not even allowed to live here. And she's like, what are you talking about? Of course I'm going to live here. This is my home. These are my children. We need a place to live. So in a lot of ways, your mother was very ahead of her time, but
Yeah, I
all
mean, I think perhaps I can't just make her a product of, these terrible things that happened to her, but
right,
she also had a streak of her own father's cruelty
right,
and all of that. But when she left my father, she had nothing, and plus she was very ill, she was
right,
very, very severe
right.
asthmatic. So there was this tiny little cottage in not in Kerala, but in the adjoining state of
Hmm.
Tamil Nadu, where my grandfather had by then left his family, and we didn't know where he was, whatever. That was another story. And
Hmm.
he was this very vain imperial entomologist who took the imperial part of his profession seriously. And I think we broke into that house. I don't know how we got into that. It was a tiny, tiny, tiny place
Right.
with very cold and scary. Anyway, we were just living like fugitives, and there were these huge trunks of his very expensive clothes and
Right.
cufflinks and all this. And suddenly her mother and her older brother arrived and said, "Get out of the house, because, women do not have the right to inherit, and this is not your house."
Right.
And she and I mean, I, aged 3, and my brother, aged 4.5, ran to a lawyer's office to
Hmm.
say, like they are trying to evict us. And that lawyer said, well, this is not Kerala, and that law does not apply in this state.
Hmm.
So, and even tenants have rights, and so they can't evict you. And we came back, and that was a first little victory.
Hmm.
But the shame and the humiliation of that and the anger that it caused, she held on to. And when she could, which was very many years later, she
Hmm.
challenged the inheritance law.
And before that, she gave away all of her father's suits and all of his cufflinks. And
To the
you
taxi
and you
drivers.
said the taxi drivers in this town were the best dressed taxi
Yes.
drivers for the longest time. I part of the joy of reading Mother Mary Comes to Me is all of those details, right? It's not to deny that there are terrible things that happen, but you get these details. And it's you do it in both of the novels too. You do it in a lot of the essays as well, where you just find that one detail that puts everything right into perspective. And I want to talk about language for a second, and I want to go back to this idea, right, of building a world, building a book. I mean, the way we talk about writing, you're building a frame and or you're building an outline. It all starts with what does the foundation look like? What does it mean to be a creative person in the world? And there are some folks who've said, well, Arundhati's an activist first and a writer second. And you're like, well, actually, I'm just a writer who is in the world. And I'd like us to spend some time there because I think it's a really important distinction to make. You're just like, no, this is what I do. I write, I build story, I build experiences, I build all of this. And it starts with a language, right?
It starts with language. I mean, I think even before you think about building a story or writing a book, for me, language was almost much deeper than that. It was a way of talking to myself in a multilingual world,
Right.
of describing what was going on to myself in my head, even maybe before I knew how to write, It was, I would say, it was a search for sanity, a
Hmm.
search for letting the blood flow in my body. Because until I found that language, I was kind of dammed up, clogged up. And it's not about producing books or producing essays or producing a huge CV. It's about talking to yourself or talking to somebody you love and being able to communicate what you're feeling or thinking or whatever, you know.
Hmm.
The books and the structured stuff comes later. The product, as the capitalist world likes to think of books and things, comes later, you know. But the fundamental thing is talking to yourself, you know,
Mm.
and to those who you love. And often those who we love haven't grown up in that village or haven't any idea of, in fact, for all my life, until Mother Mary came to me, nobody that I was close to in Delhi, which is where I spent all my life,
Right.
had ever been to Kerala. They all came for the launch of this book in Cochin, and they
Yep.
were like, one of my closest friends, like, Roy, you have a completely different swagger here, you know? Because in Delhi, I was just always this lone person without a background,
Mm.
without a family, I was just a drifting thing. And suddenly they come and see, oh my God, there's this whole place. And that's what she's been writing about, you know? So, it starts from there. And then,
Right.
of course, every single thing I write, I mean, to me, architecture is also a language, you
Hmm.
know. uh, Production design is also
Yeah.
a language.
Yeah. Yeah.
Acting was never so much a language for me, but architecture, design, screenplay, all of these are languages in which you search within that language for the maximum you can push it to, for
Yeah.
the maximum that genre can do. And I did not ever want to write a screenplay that could have been a book,
Hmm.
an essay that should have been a novel that should have been a manifest. You know, no,
Yep.
it has to be itself, its own thing, you know. Like this book that I've just written, I didn't want it to be fiction because I wanted to be an unadorned Mrs. Roy because I
Yeah.
wanted to share her with
Hmm.
people that I love. You know, this is who she was in the darkness, in the light, in the twilight, in the dawn. This is who she was. You know, and it was a challenge for me as a
Hmm.
writer. Can you can you write her without wrapping her up and giving her a label? And can you write without resolving her for the readers or for anybody, you know, because I never could resolve her for myself. So that was a challenge. But so I think art comes from a place where it's very, very personal, you know,
Hmm.
and to say that a writer who writes about the world she lives in, whether it's personal or political, whether it's the village or the city or the river or the occupied Kashmir or whatever it is, to say that that person needs to be called an activist is to fundamentally minimize what literature is, because the whole world is busy turning books into products,
Hmm.
busy turning writers into somebody who entertains or lives on
Yeah.
bestseller lists or goes to festivals and keeps you comfortable, you know. And the minute the discomfort comes, then you have a different appellation, you know.
I actually don't necessarily look for books to make me comfortable.
Yeah.
I'm one of those readers where I'm like, I need the voice. I need that narrative voice, whether it's, third person close or first person. I need, and I don't necessarily have to like the narrator. I don't necessarily have to like the characters. I need to want to be part of the voice. And voice for me is always language. And that is the first thing I am reading for no matter what. I'm going to paraphrase you or actually quote you for a second. You have this great line where you're talking about, I always knew from childhood that I wanted to be a writer. And then you go on to say, nothing made me forget the world like reading did. Nothing made me think about the world like reading did. Nothing else filled me up. Nothing else emptied me out. And that is possibly, and I've been reading a really long time, and I was like, oh, that actually kind of perfectly describes my reading life from the time I was small and could read for myself finally. I mean, who doesn't like to have an adult read them a story? But once I could read on my own and really could dive into a world without someone translating it for me.
Yeah.
And to have that complete immersion and to maybe be whacked out of my comfort zone a little bit where it's like, what, well,
Mm.
okay, I grew up in a place where it was pretty much me, my brother, and my mom were the only people who looked like we do.
Yeah.
And so to be able to dive into a book and have Maxine Hong Kingston, explain the world a little differently, or Amy Tan, or James Baldwin, or Toni
Morrison.
Morrison,
Mm.
to be able to say, hey,
Yeah.
there are some other things happening out there in the
Yeah,
world.
exactly. And it's and then there's the other thing, when you grow up in India, or this very conservative society of that's also so suffocating, and
Right.
this whole nationalism that comes, where you
Hmm.
think this little place where we live is the center of the universe, and
Hmm.
let's all wave flags, and let's all talk in slogans, and
Right.
that's also so sickening, the over sort of vernacularization of everything,
Hmm.
and it's like we live in a world, we got to deal with the whole world.
Right. That is exactly it. Your mother was wildly transgressive in so many ways. I mean, she wasn't always very nice to your brother, but she did also raise young men in her schools where she was like, listen, you have to take the women seriously. You are not allowed to be the center of you are not everything. And I mean, that's a radical act in
Yeah,
this
I
in the
mean,
60s and 70s, when
yeah.
your mother is doing work that no one else is particularly interested in doing. And the idea that your parent is that transgressive, I mean, that does teach you maybe that you're going to end up, shall we say, not necessarily being part of a mainstream, as it were. I mean,
Well, it depends. I mean, sometimes you could just be the exact opposite, right?
right,
You could
right.
you could you could yearn for, and I think my brother did yearn for what everyone had, a family, a wife, and children. And me, I was just like, thanks, but no thanks. I'm out of here. I can't. It's different also because as a girl, I was, constantly being made aware, oh, no
Hmm.
one's going to marry you, you don't have a dowry. And my mother said, well, would you want to marry any of them? I'm like, no, I'm good. Thank you. But, so it was all, and there are ways, of course, as you know in the book, but she's also deeply conservative compared
Right.
to me,
Yes, compared to you, yes,
Yes.
absolutely,
So
absolutely.
there's always that thing where, you can be in some ways absolutely transgressive, and in other ways completely
Hmm.
conservative, and I see that so much among friends on the left in India,
Hmm.
they can be politically radical, and they can be talking about capitalism and corporate stuff, and then they can be so conservative that you're just like, your eyes are spinning in your head. Are you
Right.
are you the same person?
But I think too, for us as adults to discover that our parents are actually people, it started to break my brain in my 20s when I realized that my parents not only had had genuine lives before, like when you're little, of course, my parents are just my parents. They have no identity beyond me. But sort of, once I got out of college and I was like, oh, wait, you are slightly more complicated than I thought you were. And, to approach them not as peers, certainly, but like that changing, that switch, right? When you are no longer the child, and you're kind of figuring out what that relationship now looks like, and watching you sort that out on the page.
It was true. I mean, in my case, I think, in some ways, as a child,
Mm-hmm.
I I was her parent, you know.
Right,
I
right,
was breathing for her because she
right.
couldn't breathe, and I was attached to her in ways. I was excusing her for the things she did, as a
Right.
parent might, a sort of wayward child. I was not reacting. I never reacted to
Mhm.
her. I never could, because if you reacted, I'm going to get asthma and die, and it's going to be your fault. So I never reacted. But what happened when I went to Delhi and joined the School of
Right.
Architecture, the switch was for me really that until then, I thought that if she dies, and she kept telling me, I might die, what will happen to you, what will you do, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, if she dies, I'll have to die somehow.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I literally entered the gates of the School of Architecture, my first thought was, if she dies, I don't have to die,
Right.
you know?
Right.
And that set off, I mean, she immediately realized that dependency was not there, and that created a lot of hostility, which created the break in the end.
Mm.
And then I met her as an adult, as an equal.
Yeah.
In fact, when she passed away, one of the students in a school asked me a question for the school magazine, and she,
Yeah.
like, what is the
Right.
relationship? I said it was, well, the wary relationship between two nuclear powers, because somewhere she knew that this girl, if anyone is going to stand up to me, it's going to be her. And I never wanted to stand up to her. Like, I just wanted her to, I just didn't, I was just like, I'm not using my weapons, even if I have them.
Part of your mother's legacy to you, though, and this is a line that you use a couple of times, couple, three times in the book, is the safest place is the most dangerous. And I mean, you've sort of alluded to this in the conversation thus far, but I I understand how that works in the context of your fiction and the essays and the journal. And I understand how in the context of the writing. But for you as Arundhati Roy, human being, that seems like a really powerful and very vulnerable thing to share with a bunch of strangers.
But I think, it's like that's how I was wired from the time I was
Okay.
so small, because
Yeah.
the safest place, well, for us, there was only one point of refuge, and that was her. And she was the most dangerous.
Right.
So I think I grew up as a child, I grew up with my eyes on all the exits. I always had to know where's the exit, where's the escape from
Mhm.
here. And I just continue to be like that because
Right.
uh, and that's the sad thing in a way. I don't like that about myself,
Hmm.
but I just feel like any moment anything can happen. It's like Esteban in the God of Small Things. Things can change in a day, and anything
Hmm.
can happen to anyone. And this is a constant theme, and then it just segued so easily into the political position that I'm in, and the fact that any day, any moment, anything can happen, and any moment, the police notice can come or this can happen, and it happens
Hmm.
to other people, and those are the people that are my friends. And so it just, it searches for itself. It's that lack of safety sort of manifests and magnifies and becomes a political position almost, and then you do things that cause the safe place to be unsafe.
Mm.
And I'm constantly, I mean, like, that was a pattern I noticed in the book, that I'm constantly blowing up things that ought to have given me some kind of security. Whether it's relationships, or whether it's like film contract, or whether it's the person who's going to be like your funder of your next movie,
Right.
or whatever it is. You're like, okay, I'm moving on from here, and I'm not, it's like no prisoners taken, I'm out.
Well, money and fame are part of that, right? I mean, there are people
Yeah.
who aspire to all of the money and all of the fame, and you have a really complicated relationship with both. And I mean, for some people, money and fame are safe. Ultimately, you can't be touched, you can't be criticized. Like, they are the ideal state. You aspire to that. And you're kind of like, well, let me explain my very complicated relationship with fame and with money. And I remember when The God of Small Things was first published, it was so exciting because there were people who were kind of underestimating you a little bit. And I am going to ask you to tell the story of the book's original publication, because there are all of these things that come together in a wild way where it's just like, that doesn't happen for other people. But I remember in the US when it was coming out, I mean, there was some buzz and we were all kind of excited, but it was kind of like, oh, look at this lovely little novel that Random House is doing. And yes, we paid a lot of money for it, but and then suddenly it just shot into the stratosphere and it was everywhere and everyone was reading it and you were everywhere. And it was a really exciting moment because we hadn't seen anyone like you, right? And then you win the Booker and it's like, hey, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Like, this woman wins the Booker for ostensibly a tragicomic novel that, has Faulknerian echoes in it. And I mean, you have done a thing in The God of Small Things, but it was this exciting moment just watching you take off. And yet, all I could also think at the time was, yeah, I'm glad that's not me. I mean, there was no privacy. I mean, people were just in your business all the time. It's also slightly why I'm surprised that we get a memoir from you, because for years you've kind of been like, yeah, I did a thing. And you'll drop a hint in an interview here, or you'll say a thing, but we've never had a complete picture of you.
So that was, that was just crazy what happened with the God of Small Things. But it happened so fast that
Hmm.
I don't think I got the measure of it,
Oh,
you
okay.
know. Um, it just, it was just, and I didn't know anything about the
Right.
world of publishing. I didn't believe in any way that a novel could make money,
Hmm.
it wasn't something that happened. And then when it happened so fast. And I was, as I say in this memoir, we had all these ragged friends who were like, "Oh, Roy, thank
Hmm.
God we are rich." And that was our thing, it was like everyone felt it was fine. It was part of it. And
Right.
it was actually because so many people got to do so much work with that money,
Right. Right.
It was just spread around. But the thing is that immediately after that, that's in the memoir. Like,
Yeah.
I won the Booker Prize in October, and in May, and then there was some tragedies in the family, and my mother who fought the inheritance law for equal rights. I was living with the man whose parents left him everything, and I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do it,
Right. Right.
and it was a considerable thing, like huge houses and whatever. So I sort of began the process of leaving. It was heartbreaking. And then the Hindu right came to power. And
Right.
the first thing they did were these nuclear tests. And the language, the public language in India just became so vitiated, so ugly, unacceptable. Things that had been unacceptable to say became acceptable. And I was this, fairy princess on the cover of every magazine. And it was just taken that I was my booker, and my book was all a part of this Hindu nationalism. And I
Right.
knew that that's when I knew that keeping quiet is as political as speaking out. And I wrote this first essay, The End of
Hmm.
Imagination, about what it does to your imagination to have nuclear weapons, even if you don't use them. And and I said, well, if it's anti-Indian and anti-Hindu to have a nuclear device implanted in my brain, then I secede and I declare myself a mobile republic. And that just brought everything crashing down on
Mm.
me. And they were like, get out of the country and go to Pakistan and you're a traitor. And I was like, oh, thank God I'm out of this fame thing now. Notoriety is a better place to be. And then I started to travel around, and everything that I wrote came from something that happened to me. It wasn't just drawn from the pages of some reading or some manifesto or some theory.
Can I go back to this notoriety is a better place to be for a moment? I don't think I've ever heard someone say that ever, ever.
Well,
Um,
who wants to be loved by these freaking raging nationalists? I mean, please, if they were to praise me, I'd go drown myself somewhere.
well, don't do that, but I understand the sentiment. I am, it's so interesting to me too how clear your voice has always been. There's a genuine, and so I did reread God of Small Things very, very recently, and as I said, my my new edition has 34th printing in the front. Just that delights me to no end. But to re-immerse myself in that story and with those characters and in that language again, and having read the memoir, there are tiny details like your uncle, the Rhodes Scholar turned pickle baron. There are some
That's a
details.
big one,
Yeah,
not the
no,
tiny one. Yeah.
I mean, now I understand why he was walking around saying, I am Chaco. I'm like, oh, you kind of are when you realized it too. So it's not like I'm telling you anything new. But I love this idea that you were able to take that kind of detail and give it a little bit of a brush there is something cinematic to the way you describe the terrain and the place and the houses and the clothing. Um, the sky blue Buick or the Plymouth, excuse me, it's a Plymouth.
Plymouth.
All of those, or the way you talk about the Sound of Music in the movie, all of it is, there is a poetry to the language, but then to also see that you've been taking notes for a really long time. You have been noticing everything about your family. And part of that maybe comes from the fact that you and your brother could sit in silence and just not necessarily have to talk about things as a tiny person. But there you are as a kid noticing everything.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I think part of it has to do with this sense of survival. Like, you
Hmm.
better notice everything. You better know where
Mm.
the exit doors are. You better
Right,
notice what the streams of tension, and you better, even if you completely misunderstand things as children, but you
right.
better bloody well notice them, you know?
Hmm.
And that and that combined with a childhood spent on a river catching fish and staying extremely still. I mean, catching the tiniest fish any human being could possibly catch, I suppose. But, I learned to be very still and very quiet. And I keep thinking about this, growing up like that
Yeah.
and growing up today, even if you're in a remote place with Instagram and Facebook and all this just noise. I mean, sometimes it's beautiful, sometimes it's terrible, whatever it is, but it's noise, 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 opinions, pictures, images. And there I was, absolutely like nothing. The river, the trees, the beetles, the worms, and that seemed like such a privilege now, you know?
Hmm.
No shops, no restaurants, no cinema halls, nothing. I mean, even the food you ate, you could see it grow around you, you
Right.
know?
But I think that grounds you in a way, and not just grounds you in place, but grounds you in a moment in time where you can let your imagination run as well. And you're not having images pushed at you.
Exactly. Except
And
books and
right,
reading. That's
right.
it. That's it,
Which,
you know? And there's something so gentle about the way that works on your mind
mm,
as opposed to, YouTube videos or
right.
whatever it is, you know?
It's, I feel like you balance between sort of the quiet. I mean, you work in Delhi, which is not not a quiet city. And I say this as someone who lives in New York and spends quite a lot of time in Los Angeles, also not quiet cities. But there is a way to be quiet in those places. And there is a way to ground yourself in that world, right? And yet there you are as well. I mean, you started writing Ministry of Utmost Happiness in the middle of a storm and a giant tree falls, and you're like, I don't know, maybe this is a sign. Maybe it's a
Yeah,
second novel thing. I don't know.
yeah.
But I love the idea of you sitting down to work. You have an image pop into your head, and you say, well, now's the time to get to work. And it's been a minute since I've written a novel. And yet, you know, you've got this crazy storm happening around you. And you're like, no, I have this image. I'm going to start. I'm going to do this thing.
It's an interesting thing, that I think I have. Yes, of course, I grew up in this very quiet place,
Mm.
but the city also saved me,
Right,
from everything that Kerala and that parochial place at
right.
that time had to offer me. And I was always grateful to the city. And I don't know, I find that I can often sometimes deploy my voice from the heart of a crowd
Mhm.
as I have done. And in Delhi, my house, sometimes people, is this Jannat guest house of the ministry? Because, there are monkeys, and then I feed the crows,
Yeah.
like many crows come and they start demanding, like, it's time for our food. And, during COVID, a stray dog, she just came up the steps, and I call her Banjaran, which means the gypsy. And she just came up and produced six puppies on my
Ah,
steps. And so there's this, I mean, you're alone and yet you're never alone. And there's a sort
mhm,
of isolation that there is in the Western world
mhm,
that I don't feel in India, although I know that it's coming. I know that young people are feeling very, very lonely, even in the
mm,
crowd over there.
yeah.
But I think my generation is just escaped that, and we have these crazy, deep, absolutely unconditional friendships where there's so you can be alone and not alone, not lonely, let's say. You can be alone and not lonely. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, whenever people offer me this, would you like to go to this retreat and write for 3 months? It terrifies me. I'm like, no, I don't go to retreats. I want to advance. I don't want to retreat, you know.
You also, though, in your uncle, G. Isaac, the Rhodes Scholar turned pickle baron. I mean, I'm sorry, that is the best shorthand ever for a relative. Rhodes Scholar turned pickle baron. Um, he, though, did, you describe it as, well, he made failure sound fascinating. He made failure look like something you actually wanted to do. And part of me is wondering if that sort of helps you get where you're going beyond the fact that you've got your mother blazing this trail and teaching you all sorts of things you didn't even really know you wanted to know. And then you've got an uncle who's like, well, if you fall on your face, it's fine. Like, that's actually a rare
Yeah.
combination, right? Especially in Asian families, like, we are not supposed to fall on our faces. So the idea that we can take a swing at the weird thing, right? Like, says the woman who decided to be a bookseller and didn't take the job her dad got her. That went over exactly the way you expected it to gone over. But I mean, really, like, I'm kind of fascinated by this uncle of yours.
Yeah, it was amazing. When I was five, he showed me some little bauble and he's like, "Do you want this?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I'll give it to you if you fail."
Right,
And
right,
I really just stopped in my tracks. I remember that so
right,
clearly. And later on, of course, there's this part in the book where he's the person against whom my mother
right,
fought the case. So there were
right.
these two people in this little town fighting each other, and the whole town was watching. It was
Mhm.
entertainment for them. But
Right.
somehow they both knew also that they were the only worthy opponents, you know?
Mhm.
So ultimately, at the end, they became very good friends at the end of their lives. But there's a part where she's won the case and she's just, ruling the waves. And this filmmaker comes from Delhi to make a film about the case. And my uncle is in the pickle factory and I'm there. And the shot is set up, and this
Mhm.
guy from Delhi used to come to like patronize these small town hicks. He's like, "Tell me, Mr. Isaac, as
Mhm.
a leader of the Syrian Christian community, what are your views on the Travancore Christian Succession Act?" And he goes, "Mr. Talib, the Syrian Christians are a very complicated community, and we have
Right.
the Yakoba and the Martoma and the Kana, and we all hate each other, and we
Mhm.
never agree about anything. But the one thing you find if you question them closely is the one thing they do agree about is that Isaac is not a leader of the community." Then he laughs.
I mean, listen, your uncle was a grounded man. I mean, even if maybe running the pickle
I
factory
mean,
was not his highest moment.
I don't think anyone would call him grounded, but he
Okay,
was
all right.
he was a nut. He was a Marxist. Then he organized the women in the factory into a union to strike against him. Then he offered them the factory, and they were like, "No, we don't want it." It's just craziness, you know.
How
But
does it feel having this book out in the world? I mean, this book is really personal in a way that earlier
yeah,
works were
well,
not.
I thought that, I mean, really, the first impetus was that I think Mrs. Roy and G. Isaac and Mickey Roy and
Yeah,
all these people, I just shouldn't keep them to myself, you know?
right.
Like people should have them too. That was that was why I wrote it. And I feel that in some ways, especially now when everybody has some story about you, and I'm like, no, 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 no,
Right,
no. Let me
right.
tell you, how it was. So it's not it's and I also felt like there's nothing in trying to sell straightforwardly or slimily some good version of yourself. Let's just let's just try. And I mean, I one thing that I feel a little overwhelmed by, which I should have expected, but I didn't. It somehow opens the door of a lot of emotion for people, and I'm not equipped to deal with that. Like the pain that there is inside people seems to have, especially in India, it's sort of come unlocked, I mean, people are just, even sometimes people who are interviewing me are crying, and I kind of, I find it hard to navigate that, but
Hmm.
I understand it. But I think it's something to do with what's happening in the world right now, not just about this book or about me, but there's something pent up, and I think this thing that is okay, like you don't have to judge everyone, you don't
Hmm.
have to label everyone, you don't have to be completely unforgiving. You don't, at some time you have to grow up and not infantilize yourself in front of your parents. You have to forgive, something like that, which is more than the book, and that I find, that difficult, a little difficult, because I don't feel equipped, because there are people who have had much harder times than
Hmm.
me, and
Hmm.
I don't want to just generalize and tell people. I'm a very bad advice giver, let's say.
I think it's a danger for a lot of writers where there's such reading is such an intimate experience, and there is when you do your jobs well, people suddenly feel like they know everything about you. And I realize this is a memoir, but at the same time, um, we only have a piece of you.
Yeah, and
We
also
have
it's
one piece of you.
yeah, but I also felt that, the like when people ask me, about this thing about it being cathartic, I
Right,
just sort of flinch, because I think it's not cathartic, man. I lived with this all my life.
right.
It's not cathartic. It was really a writing challenge, because I take writing and the craft of it very seriously. But I think what is a bit of a relief for me
Hmm.
is talking about money, like
Oh,
in the book.
okay.
Because this thing of having no money, then
Hmm.
having the money, and then people misunderstanding what that meant, or people
Hmm.
thinking that somehow it's some inheritance, or
Right,
and I thought a lot about how to use this money
right.
to not to be charitable, and not to be, oh, I'm feeding no, to be political,
Yeah.
and that's not easy, and I don't do that alone. Again,
Mhm.
it's done by people, but I wanted to share that too,
The money thing, man, that's hard for everyone. But you are very funny a lot of the time when you're talking about money. I mean, you are so funny in general. And I think there are a lot of folks out there, certainly critics who I've read of yours, who don't understand that there's a lot of humor in what you're doing. They're just like, oh, she's so mad. She's so mad. She's enraged all of the time. And I'm like, yeah, but she's also making jokes. Like, are you not catching the jokes? And this is even in the political writing too. I mean, you are always making jokes. And like at one point, you're talking about being in a cult. You're like, listen, my brother and I were in a cult of two. But like, who describes their parent as a cult leader? And yet, your mom kind of was a cult leader in the community, just the way the community saw her and all of these kinds of things. And at least for me as a reader, right? Like, when I'm seeing someone go through the stuff, and they can be funny about it, you have my loyalty for life. I am one of those people who's like,
Yes.
let's make fun of the terrible stuff because what else are we going to do?
Yes.
And it's so inappropriate. And especially, I'm sorry, especially when you're a woman, and especially if you're an Asian, when people are like, excuse me, why are you finding this funny? And it's like, because this is hysterical. I don't know what else to do except to laugh because it's so horrifying. I'm going to be that person making a joke at the funeral, and everyone's heads go, what?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and I just,
Absolutely. I mean, it's funny. I mean, like so, but I mean, a lot of people have said, "Oh God, it's
mm,
so funny," and your sense of humor. I said, "Well, a lot of it is borrowed, because these characters I write about is so hilarious. I can't just take all the credit, But it's crazy every day. I mean, living through what I lived through. People
mm,
ask me, "Why do you live in India?" I said, "Because every day something makes me literally burst out laughing."
right.
I mean, that's in the book, right? When my grandmother dies, and this coffin is being lowered into the ground, and the bishops are saying the prayers, and this little lady kind of burrows her way into, and
Hmm.
at my side as the coffin is going down. She's like, "I really love the God of small things." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Shall I tell you why?" I said, "Maybe later." She says, "Farting under the water. We have all done it." And she went like, "All right, okay."
As I
But
said, there are readers who feel like they have an intimate connection with a writer once they've read their work.
yeah. I'm just like, what a moment to come up with that. But it's really, if you can't see what's so hilarious all
Hmm.
around, like like I said, I wrote this End of Imagination against Hindu nationalism, and this
Right.
doctor who's got one boob of mine trapped in the mammogram machine is giving me a lecture about how terrible I am and how India should be a Hindu country and how the God of Small Things was really boring. I'm like, okay, thanks, doc.
I was about to say a mammogram is bad enough, and then to be lectured while this is happening, I'm offended on your behalf. That's just. But okay, so here's the thing though. You start this book in a place of deep grief. Your mother has died. You are in a place of deep grief. You're trying to understand your relationship with Mrs. Roy. And here you and I are laughing about everything because isn't that exactly where we're supposed to get, right? Isn't that why you write? And isn't that why I read? And isn't that why we're in the world making sense of the things that happen?
Well, the thing is, if people think that, like some people say, why do you think that sad songs should be sung sadly and happy
Hmm.
songs should be sung happily? That's
Right,
so boring, right? So laughter does not mean there's no grief, and
right.
sort of crying could be fake grief, It's just all these things they're not so simple to decode, and to me. Laughter does not mean ha ha ha, it means a deep understanding of something.
And I am really, really grateful I get to read that laughter when I read you. Arundhati Roy, thank you so much for joining us on Poured Over. Mother Mary Comes to Me is out now, and certainly all of the backlist is there too. Thank you.
Thanks. That was so beautiful. What a lovely conversation.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.